Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you're having a very Merry Christmas. After a day of holiday festivity, although tempered by COVID and watching the Saints, talking politics is an appropriate Louisiana follow-up. We'll be doing that as we evaluate some of the year's political newsmakers, as well as the top stories and influencers. At our table are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Grace, political columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Jessica Williams, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. I'm going to go over to Errol first, just for a quick COVID update. We always need to do that. So how are we looking now?
Well, on the surface, this might be the Christmas when the Grinch wins, okay? But we all know that in the end, because of our basic decency and goodness, and also having a vaccine that will win in the end, it's just a question of when. You know, people are wondering, we're hearing about some of the early people being vaccinated, and like, when will it be to the point where like the general public is being vaccinated? And it seems like people are thinking like around maybe spring, like sometimes in April. So who knows, by the summer, maybe we're going to be seeing some really positive things, positive developments. You wouldn't believe it from hearing John Bel Edwards, though. The governor has been very adamant that we're in a very serious situation. He's really urged that people have a very quiet Christmas and not mix in large crowds. He points out that if you look at the numbers, that some of them are encouraging. There are some numbers where positivity numbers that are leveling off, but they're leveling off at a higher rate. A few other numbers where they're declining, but overall, there's a lot of people getting it, a lot of people in hospitals. But you know, everything you say, there's this and then there's that. There are more people, there's an increase in people who are going to ICU, but at the same time, they're not staying in ICU as long as they were at the beginning of this, because the medical people know better what they do, and they know how to handle that. And so, you know, one bad thing and one good thing, and so we're still out there. But the main thing the governor did the last week is he kept the level to a number 2 level. There was talk he'd bring it back to a number 3, and in the 2 level, it's pretty much 50% occupancy and allowing some bar rooms to open depending on how the parish is doing. And so nothing is changed other than really, really urging. What's changed is Christmas. And so other than really, really urging people to just kind of go it alone as much as they can.
So, yes, I know. And I mean, he's hoping that people have taken heed to the advice of no large gatherings, because that could ultimately make numbers go up if people don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's hard not to get that word. I mean, you know, everywhere you turn, and so it's gonna. Some people could really be thinking how to celebrate Christmas. You know, who knows? Anytime you see a situation like this, new ideas are always born. You know, and there could be some things that people do this Christmas for the first time that they say, hey, no, I like this. Why don't we make this an annual tradition? And so it could just be something that's going to just continue and grow out of it.
Maybe, but people I know still do really love to gather around the table with family and friends, and it's just really hard not to.
I mean, ultimately, it's about the family.
Yeah, and particularly, you know, for grandparents, when you can't get to your grandchildren, you know, at any time of the year, but particularly over the holidays, it's hard. It really is hard.
But so, what's really different now is Zooming. You know, the things that people can do with Zooming now. Imagine all this without Zooming. I mean, you know, without the capacity to see people virtually like that. And so I think it's having a big impact.
And so, as you mentioned, vaccines. You know, we have seen the rollout of the, you know, the early numbers of vaccines, but we're getting a whole lot more doses that are coming into the state, which is really a positive thing. Yeah,
and that's been very impressive so far. The organization of that. And so if that keeps up, I mean, yeah, things could be happening within a few months.
All righty, E. Thanks a lot. You know what? Now we're going to stick with you because, I mean, what's better to have after Christmas dinner than talking politics? So let's move on over to it. And we're going to start first with E.
Yeah, well, what we do is we have a list of just some political people, and we're going to have our expert panel comment on them. And first on the list, I think by rights of rank, is John Bel Edwards, the governor. I'd say this has been the year of the governor nationwide. I mean, this is governors really being able to act as a chief executive, and I think that John Bel Edwards has done this. To being a governor where you can make talks and make decisions and give commands and all that, as opposed to having to wrangle with the legislature. You know, the first four years of the governor's term was really spent just at war with the legislature and trying to squeeze money out of it. This was a different type of issue. This is where you make major policy decisions. He does a good job. He talks the talk of healthcare well, and I think the times he's given press conferences, I think he's been very commanding and very impressive. But it's a different kind of term than his first term. It's really being a chief executive, and probably the way that the governor would like to be.
Yes, well, I mean, he's had a pandemic to deal with, and he has definitely made some tough decisions. As you point out, the legislature has battled him on that.
They have, but it's really been ultimately, a governor's decision. And I mean, some legislators have questioned whether or not he has the authority to do all he can. But just look nationwide. I mean, this has been the year about governors. I mean, governors have become really political celebrities this year. And a lot of people couldn't have even probably name most governors outside of their own this year. And so the way the whole federal system is established, with states being political entities in themselves, you really saw it work this year.
Okie doke. Let's move on over to Jessica now. And your turn now. You wanted to talk about LaToya Cantrell, Mayor Cantrell.
I did, and Errol said it's been a year of the governor. I'd say it's been a rough year for the mayor, and particularly for mayors of tourism-dominant cities like New Orleans. It's been tough with this pandemic. She's had to balance a lot of competing interests when this pandemic hit. You've got businesses who have been really struggling, and in the beginning of this didn't understand why she wasn't opening things up a little bit more quickly or at the same pace of the rest of the state. People who were really looking at the bottom line and who, were struggling and were not getting federal aid at the rate that they expected to get. And we're fearful of what the virus would do to the economy. You've got the tourism industry who was upset in the very beginning and, has been on better terms with the mayor more recently, but just, people saying decisions were being made without their input, wondering why they weren't at the table when the mayor was making decisions about whether to open up certain segments of the city. And then, of course, there's the other side of this. People were dying, are dying. The virus has taken people out, or was taking people out in New Orleans at a rate faster than anywhere else in the state in the very beginning of this. And while it hit people of color the hardest, of course, white people were not immune. We had folks that were not taking the mask mandate seriously, and the mayor had to decide how to enforce that. Wasn't a lot of enforcement more recently, but in the beginning, I think she mentioned that she wanted to institute a fine of $500 for people who weren't wearing them or who were violating any aspect of COVID restrictions, and that didn't play out at the level that we thought it might. But she did take some blows, and I think, she'll be glad, and she said this at a press conference last week, she'll be glad to see 2020 come to a close.
I'm sure so. I mean, it's been rough for the end of 2019. It wasn't so easy, too, with the collapse of the Hard Rock. Just normal problems of running a city, but having a pandemic on top of it with your economy shut down, she's had to really stand firm, and she has stood firm.
She has, and you've seen that really at every turn, even when there's been intense pressure from, the tourism industry, from national media who questioned why the city, didn't pull the trigger on Mardi Gras or didn't shut down Mardi Gras. She went on almost every national outlet there was to talk about how she didn't get any indication that there should, like anyone did, any indication that the virus was at the level that it was at that point. And just moving ahead, she's going to have to think about how, even now, city government is under furlough, what federal aid to expect next year. Yeah. Those are all tough decisions that she's going to have to face.
Yeah, it's still not going to be an easy year for her. Yeah, real quick.
And at least by the end of 2020, one lane of Canal Street across from the Hard Rock is open. So we've had some success there. So.
That's one positive thing. Okay, jump over to Steph now. Your choice.
Right. John Kennedy, first let me say one thing about LaToya Cantrell, point out that she is now in her re-election year on top of all of this.
That's true.
So John Kennedy is in his re-election cycle. It's 2 years, of course, for members of Congress. Senators have 6-year terms. He is now, in the next class that will stand for re-election in 2 years. So that's going to be interesting. We don't know yet whether anybody will challenge him. Of course, Republicans have the advantage in this state by quite a lot. But we've had 4 years of him in the Senate now, and I think rather than any policy areas, I think he's really kind of associated with going on Fox News and saying kind of crazy, funny, sometimes irritating stuff. And, he's kind of the senator that everybody loves to quote. He'll do things like liken legislation he doesn't like to At one point, he used the phrase, a Great Dane whiz down your leg or something. It's always something, and then it gets blown up on the internet, and he seems to quite enjoy that. But beyond that, I mean, we know I don't know that it always comes across to the rest of the country, but people here know he's a substantial politician with a background in policy and a strong education credentials and all that. He's a lawyer, and he's on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, and that's really where I think we've seen the most. He's kind of made his mark in occasionally very, very tough questioning of some of President Trump's judicial nominees, even though he generally is very much a supporter of President Trump and hasn't opposed him on any big policy areas.
So re-election.
Re-election is as of, again, Republicans have the advantage. Is there a Democrat who will challenge him? One thing to think about is the Democratic Party is a little in kind of disarray. There was a Democrat from Shreveport, Adrian Perkins, the mayor, who a lot of people thought could be a somewhat strong challenger to Bill Cassidy. This year, it turns out he wasn't. There isn't really an obvious Democrat who is in position to run a strong challenge at this point. The party just switched leadership. There was a lot of fighting over that. It's going to be tough. And people seem to, his approval rating has been fine. It hasn't been extraordinary, but it's been
okay.
It's been good.
Okay, and
Stephanie, that's the point. You're right about the national media loving him because he brings what they need the most, and that's good quotes.
Exactly.
And he's always good for that.
Yes.
Okay, E, we're going to stick with you. Your next choice.
Yeah, well, Billy Nungesser, the lieutenant governor, there was a time when lieutenant governors really had nothing to do other than to check on the governor's health if they needed to take over. In 1974, when the new Constitution was created, they put the lieutenant governor's office in charge of tourism. Here's something you can do. And it kind of put a prestigious title in charge of tourism. But that's a real platform for anyone who holds that job because it gives you a chance to go around the state to deal with something that's usually positive. I mean, to go different places and deal with promoting tourism. It's really just a good springboard theoretically in terms of doing it. And he's played that role. I mean, he's been very active in tourism, has big plans for a lot of places, including New Orleans, where he'd like to see a real riverfront revival, and they have a big Ferris wheel, and like what London has in New Orleans. And so it gives them that. But this year, with these kind of problems, he's really had to fight a lot. He and Mayor Cantrell have had disagreements because he has seen what she's doing as being counter to tourism, and that tourism is just so important to this economy, as it is. I mean, every study has shown that New Orleans is suffering more than the cities that surround it because we're more reliant on tourism. Okay. And so that struggle has continued.
All righty. Jessica? No, Stephanie, you. Back to you.
Bill Cassidy. Okay, the other senator, now the senior senator and now the recently reelected senator, Bill Cassidy. He won quite easily, which was not really a surprise. Again, a Republican state. But he's turning out to be something of an interesting senator in that he is possibly moving somewhat into that center position, that group of centrist Republicans as opposed to purely ideological Republicans who are, that puts them in the position of being deal makers, of getting things done. And I think he very much wants to. He has been a very strong supporter of President Trump. He hasn't taken votes that have really bucked the president. But if you look at really just what's going on now in the Senate, he has been very active in the COVID relief conversations. He has been pushing for state and local aid since March, and that's an interesting position because a lot of Republicans don't support that. So he's really, and he hasn't gotten it yet, but he understands. He's talked quite often what Jessica said about the fact that this is a tourism-dependent economy. We've been hit very hard. And he's a physician, and if you remember early in his term, he tried to work on the Obamacare overhaul. That fell flat. But otherwise, he's been working on smaller issues that do have bipartisan support, like surprise medical billing. That's a big...
All right, yeah, we have to move along right now and moving on over to Jessica. Your choice.
Yeah, you know, just talking about Cedric Richmond, this has been a really good year for Cedric. You saw him on the front lines of the Biden campaign as national co-chair, and there was the thought that this effort would be rewarded should Biden win, and he did, and it has been. Cedric was recently named White House Office of Public Engagement head after he had been in the House for a decade. You know, he'll really be able to bend the president's ear and offer advice, you know, to him. And he's said that he would be still continuing to work on behalf of Louisiana, on behalf of New Orleans. And really, you know, it'll be beneficial for not only us, but for cities and states around the country who face similar challenges like we face, which he, of course, became familiar with during his time here. The big question for us locally is who's going to succeed him and who he's going to endorse, and it's a big seat locally. You know, it often has had a big role in local politics in terms of influencing them. And I don't think that he's going to walk away totally from that. He said he's going to think about who to endorse and will likely make a decision after the holiday. But so far, you've got Karen Carter-Peterson and Troy Carter who have announced for the seat. And, you know, Troy's got a good track record locally, and so has Karen. And you've got several other folks who have said that they're going to consider it.
Okay.
So we'll be looking ahead to that in the new year.
Okie doke. Errol, back over to you.
Okay, well, we have Jeff Landry, the Attorney General. You know, every governor has to have at least one nemesis, and I think that Jeff Landry would be Governor Edwards' nemesis. They've been at odds many times during his first term, and now in his second term. A lot of questions about authority and various issues. I think Landry is trying to carve out kind of like a niche within conservative wings. I mean, there could be various niches within conservatives. His might be a little bit too tight or a little bit too small, but he's kind of, I think, perceived as being someone who's eyeing the governor's office. The next governor's election, there won't be an incumbent running for re-election. So I see the next few years as one continuing to be the governor and Landry just kind of fighting over different things back and forth.
All righty. Let's go back over to Jessica.
Yeah, talking about Jefferson Parish President Cynthia Lee Shang, who I think has taken a lower profile this year in the wake of the pandemic. When you compare her to her counterpart in Orleans, Mayor Cantrell, and when you compare her to the Orleans Health Department, considering that Jefferson doesn't, she said before publicly that Jefferson doesn't have a health department that's out front and center in the same way that New Orleans has been. You know, she really hasn't been in the spotlight in terms of COVID. That's even though her parish has a higher case count and had the highest case count in the state, one of the highest positivity rates in the state for many months. There just hasn't been as much public conversation about it. You did see her at a recent State of the City talk about how, or State of the Parish talk about how they have not seen as much in terms of their budget, the impacts to their budget because of COVID. As you might have anticipated, they were able to cut about $18 million. And moving ahead, they talked about, you know, just exciting things that the parish has planned, you know, in terms of their public transit system, some new, you know, ultraviolet light technology that can sanitize the bus seats if people want to get around who don't have cars. And she really painted a positive picture moving ahead into 2021. But I'd say on the whole, she hasn't been front and center in the same way that you've seen LaToya kind of get out in front, you know, on the national stage and talking about New Orleans' place within its tourism-dependent economy and how COVID has affected that.
All righty. Final name on the list, Stephanie.
Jason Williams, what a year he has had and what a year he is going to have going forward. City Councilman at large has been elected to become the new DA in Orleans Parish. Huge job. And it was quite a decisive win over Kiva Landry, who had a lot of the real political insider support. And the two big storylines are, one, he is a criminal justice reformer, absolutely committed. He's a defense attorney by trade, and he is promising very big changes for that office in terms of dialing back policies that he thinks are overly punitive, particularly towards people charged with nonviolent crimes. And he can talk about that personally because the other big story is that he's under indictment. Yeah. He's under federal indictment for tax fraud. That came down this year, and he plowed ahead and with his campaign and won. And he really talked about it in terms of understanding what it's like to be in the receiving end of an investigation. So his victory means he will be in there reforming. He's already talking about ways he wants to drastically reform the office, and probably at some point in 2021 he will stand trial. It's unclear when, and it's he is trying to get he denies everything, and he's trying to get the charges thrown out.
But he certainly did have a very solid win.
Very solid win, a little unexpected. So Kiva Landrum, former judge, ran kind of in the middle lane. I'll keep some of the policies of Leon Cannizzaro, but add some criminal justice elements to it. It really was not convincing, it turns out. When you look at the areas she won, it was kind of the areas that probably Cannizzaro would have won. Okay. And really, Jason Williams picked up the rest of the city.
Okay, that does it for this list that you guys put together. Now we're going to stick with you, Stephanie, and the other top political stories.
Oh boy, so many. I think the top political story of the year is something Errol mentioned, that John Bel Edwards' battle with the Republicans over COVID restrictions, because a lot of different things came together over that. This brewing battle, this brewing ideological battle. Of course, the governor is a Democrat, and national politics were involved. This whole idea of anti-masking and following President Trump's lead in terms of wanting to open things up and not mask. Kind of the irony that the Democratic governor was very much in line with the COVID White House task force on restrictions, whereas the Republicans in the state tended to be very much in line with the president himself. But it's a big battle. It's not over. The courts have found in the governor's favor in terms of what Errol was talking about, who has the power to impose restrictions. The Supreme Court just this week did return one of the cases to the district court
regarding the petition that had been filed.
And again, they didn't say the petition. It was a procedural matter, basically saying that the judge needs to kind of look at it again and look at the merits, not just whether it was properly filed. So the judge will do that. That doesn't mean that the restrictions are going to get thrown out, but it is still out there, and there's been a lot of kind of political rhetoric focused on this. The next big political stories, I'd say what I just talked about, Jason Williams being elected DA, and what Jessica was talking about, Cedric Richmond kind of landing in this very sweet spot in the White House, where he's in charge of public engagement, which means he's the go-between between all kinds of different groups. He's talked about being in charge of outreach to conservatives, which is interesting because he's very much a Democrat. And he said he decided to do that on the advice of people who served in the Obama and Clinton White Houses, because they didn't do that and they realized that was a mistake. He'll be in charge of outreach to every group, to environmental groups, to Mark Morial. I did an interview with the former mayor who's now head of the National Urban League, who, he's going to be the guy on the other end of the phone talking about civil rights issues. So he's going to have his hand in a lot of different pots, which will be interesting. And of course, he's also a senior advisor, which means he's kind of part of the kitchen cabinet of the new president. So it's going to be very interesting to see, I think.
And so that should sort of be a good thing for certainly the New Orleans region, if not the state of Louisiana.
Exactly. I mean, I think when we talk about flood control and flood insurance, issues like that, tourism economies,
coastal restoration, such a major issue.
Criminal justice, of course, has been a very big focus of Richmond in the legislature, so he wants to keep talking about that. It's interesting. Some environmental groups are not thrilled with his appointment there because they see him as too close to the oil and gas industry and maybe hasn't been as in front on environmental racism issues as they would have hoped. Of course, he's a Louisiana politician, and really most of them have ties to the oil and gas industry.
Right.
And yeah.
I know, big industry here in this state.
Yes.
All right, Steph, thanks. Back over to Jessica now. And influencers, that's a big word these days. Who are some of our major influencers?
Well, I think Stephanie talked about it just now. I think even though Cedric is moving into the White House, he is undoubtedly going to play still a role in local politics, certainly with whoever succeeds him. He'll play a role in endorsing that candidate. But certainly will be available to continue to offer, his very direct style of advice to the folks that he has been close with, his allies locally that he's built up over a 10-year career or a multiple-year career. Another influencer who recently passed away, Norma Jane Saveston, on December 4th. Just really everyone who I have spoken with or heard talk of her has not had any just negative words to say, just really spoke highly of her career and her mentorship, particularly of women in politics. Women in politics face difficult barriers a lot of times that men in politics do not face. And she was really highlighted recently at a city council meeting as just someone who was just a straight shooter and someone who could tell you what you needed to hear, maybe not always what you wanted to hear, but really mentored you. And she's going to be someone who's going to be missed in the local political scene for sure.
And very close to the Landry family, we should say.
Definitely.
Yes.
Right, to the Landry family, right, to Mitch and to Mary, also work very, very closely. And the thing is, she was very influential at all levels, federal level, state level, and local level, through the course of her professional life.
Yeah, I mean, was the advisor to presidents, to mayors, to governors, just someone who really was a hard worker and was really recognized for her value in every space that she was in. And
it really was a surprising and sudden loss of Norma Jane Sabston, known as NJ, to her close family and friends, and certainly our condolences to them. This is a very tough time for them, a sad holiday season for them. All righty, guys, it's now time for the round table, and who are the ones to look at in the future? Who do you see? Let's start with you, E.
Well, we know this about this year. We're going to get a new member of Congress for Cedric Richmond's seat. We're going to get a new council member at large for Jason Williams' seat. And whoever's elected to Jason Williams' seat will probably be a district council member. So at some point, we'll get another new district council member. So there's going to be a lot of those kind of changes going on. Plus, there's the mayor's election. And we don't go, it's hard to read the mayor's election. There's not too many people talking about it right now. There are a lot of people who are angry, but at the same time, they kind of understand what the realities are out there too. And so it's hard to get a feeling at this point for this race. But between the changes in Congress and people jockeying and moving from different places, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. One name that keeps coming to mind is Helena Moreno. I just think she's got somewhere else to go, and at some point she'll be moving forward soon.
Okey-doke. Stephanie, over to you.
Okay, this is a name a lot of people in this area might not know well, but Mike Johnson, he's a congressman from the Shreveport area, has been moving up in the Republican ranks very quickly, kind of in the Steve Scalise path. If you were paying attention to the Supreme Court lawsuit to overturn the election that Donald Trump supported, he was the guy who wrangled 125 of his Republican colleagues to support it. And he is someone who I think could be on the list of people running for governor in a few years.
Okay. All right, we'll take a look. Jessica.
Heading back over to City Council, when Errol mentioned the at-large seat that could be coming open, I think we should just keep a close eye on Kristen Gisselson-Palmer. She's been someone who's been in a district council person seat for quite some time, but has said that she's eyeing the at-large seat, as has several other people in the city. J.P. Morrell mentioned that he's looking at it, but definitely some changes to watch on the City Council for sure, as influenced by national and local races.
All right, guys, time to say goodbye. Thanks so much. This has been a great conversation. Good after Christmas dinner talk. Thanks a lot for joining us, and I hope that you have a good weekend. Thank you guys for watching, and have a wonderful holiday weekend too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a